My guest today promoted inclusion before it was required by law. He took on both physical and social barriers with the conviction that disability doesn't mean you can't. He founded the first comprehensive program of higher education for people with disabilities at the University of Illinois, and he helped establish the university as a power in collegiate wheelchair athletics. He was at the forefront of the disability rights movement in the 1960s, and his work in making buildings and public transportation accessible has served as a model for countries around the world. His work as an educator and advocate has touched the lives of countless individuals. I am pleased to welcome to Illinois Pioneers Timothy J. Nugent. Tim, thanks very much for being here.
Glad to be here.
It. We are just a couple of years away from the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it's been around that long, and perhaps people who have grown up in the time of the ADA wouldn't know what it was like for disabled people, say a person who used a wheelchair, in the late 40s when you started. What would it have been like then, 48, 49?
Well, precepts and concepts and attitudes were much different in those days. Many of the young people that came to the university that were disabled in the early years had never been in a grade school or high school. They were all homebound instructed, hospital instructed, orthopedic school instructed. In fact, right in town here, we found 8 people in wheelchairs that the school district didn't even know about. They were all in their late teens or 20s.
That's really remarkable that just as a small percentage of people who came to university had not been to public grade school, high school. And I think that, you know, at some point maybe we'll talk more about this, but one of the things that you really had to work with people on was developing the skills that they needed to have to live independently and teach them to do things that before they hadn't done.
That's true, and we had a period about 2 weeks before school started. We called it the Functional Training Week, and they called it Hell Week, because they were getting out of bed so often they prayed for insomnia. They would get off the stool so often they prayed to be constipated. And my staff would live with them 24 hours a day and work with them to overcome the apathy and the apprehensiveness that they had. Parents would bring their students here and not want to leave them in the early years. They were concerned about leaving their youngsters on a big campus like this, and they were concerned about trusting me and my assistants. Yeah. They would go to the first motel out of town and scout us out for the first 2 weeks.
And I guess one thing that just really strikes me was the fact that administrators actually seem to think that if students saw their fellow students in wheelchairs, just going around the campus, that would be upsetting to them to the point that it would be disruptive.
Well, it's true that many administrators and faculty thought this would become a university of, quote, gimps. They thought it would be depressing, demoralizing, an extra cost, an extra liability, and what would they do with the college education?
They actually thought that even if the students could complete the work and graduate and get a degree, that there wouldn't be any point to have it.
Well, there were those that thought that, and they were large in numbers. I don't know the actual percentage, but there was resistance in several departments, several colleges, but there were also those that supported my thinking. And they helped me, sometimes under the blanket, so to speak. But it wasn't an easy task because the attitude was so different. And the truth of the matter is that people with disabilities have the same aspirations, the same interests, the same talents, the same skills as you and I have. They just only go about doing them differently.
Yeah. I want to step back a little bit and talk a little bit about your childhood. It's my understanding that you had some experience with disability when you were young because you had family members that were dealing with disabilities.
Well, I myself was born with a bad heart back in the days when they didn't do anything with the heart, you know. I had a sister who was very talented, had been on the stage at the age of 6, in fact, who was going blind, and so they forbid her playing the piano anymore and dancing anymore, acrobatic dancing. And I saw what that did to her psychologically, emotionally. My father was near deaf and had very severe visual handicaps. And that, again, was in the days when people didn't tolerate those things. So I had a sense of empathy for what the problems created. And of course, I went into World War II, originally in the Medical Corps, later on in the infantry, and came out a disabled veteran myself. not severely disabled, but enough to know what it was. And I went back to college, finished my first graduate degree, and was pursuing a second. And I wanted to do something that would bear some significance, something I could call my own. And so I was given the opportunity to come to the Galesburg campus of the University of Illinois, which, by the way, was a brand new Army hospital. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't needed anymore at the end of the war. So it became a part of War Assets Administration, and the university made a bid for it and created the Galesburg division at the same time they created Illini Pier in Chicago.
So this is interesting as a bit of university history, because this was after the war, and the university felt there was going to be an explosive demand for higher education because of the GI Bill. So they created these campuses, the one in Chicago and the one at Galesburg. And the one at Galesburg, because it had been an Army hospital and was, for the time, pretty accessible, then, and you can tell me if I get the story right, then the VA thought this would be a good place for us to try to see what could be done to help disabled veterans.
Yes, the VA was a part of it. The American Legion was a part of it in a very remote way in some respects at that time. The division persisted until the spring of '49, at which time the governor decided to close it and create it into a geriatrics institute. At that time, the main campus did not accept the idea of their coming here.
This stuns me that so the governor said it doesn't make sense to continue this as a college campus. We're going to do something else with it. We're going to close everything down. And then the university, did the university say to you, well, Tim, we're just going to close your program? And you said, well, can't we come to Urbana? What did they say?
Well, they didn't say it that straightforward. They just refused to acknowledge that we could come here. And we did several things. We marched on the Capitol, pursued the governor, talked with Senator Thompson, who was senior senator in the state. We marched on the campus here. We demonstrated with planking from a paint scaffold going up the steps of Lincoln Hall, things like that.
So when the program started out, were most of the students, these were men who had served in World War II, had been injured, and were using wheelchairs as a result?
We had blind, we had some deaf, we had non-veterans as well. We had even a woman non-veteran the very first semester we were in operation at Galesburg. But it was the veterans that made it possible, because most of the general citizenship, when they got out of the hospital, they went into a nursing home or they were hidden in the back room of a house. The veterans, we knew where they were because there was one agency in the country that knew where all the veterans with disabilities were. So the veterans were the source of our gaining personnel to participate, as well as a source for income.
And I imagine that when it came time to protest the closing of the program, they were might have been a little bit more assertive or more organized than other students would have been?
Yes and no. We had about 20 paraplegic-driven cars march on the Capitol in Springfield and were refused to see the governor. We went through all sorts of things there, and the city police were very helpful to us. I couldn't understand why. I'm a young man from Wisconsin. I don't know anything about Illinois politics, and they were so helpful. I found out later on they had all been a part of the state police force, and the present governor had fired them. So you get strange bedfellows from time, and sometimes it works out.
Yeah. Why was that so? Why was medical science at the time so off? And basically, they were writing people off because they were saying, well, this person simply isn't going to survive.
Well, of course, spinal cord injury was a rather new thing with World War II in numbers. It was something the medical profession had not faced before in that manner. So many of the prognoses were based on not experience, but on suppositions and the difficulties that some of the spinal cord injuries had in the early years. So it wasn't a malicious act. It was just the lack of knowledge at that time that precipitated that type of thinking.
So what if at the time you described what was the essence of your program, what did you tell people that you were trying to do?
Well, first of all, we had to convince the parents that they should leave their youngsters on campus, particularly the young ones. The veterans were tough. They were willing to take their own risk. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really tell them anything except that I believed in the value of their children. I believed that they had the potential to do much more than they were doing, and we hoped that they would cooperate with us in trying to get this done.
Were other campuses doing anything like this at the time? No.
There were one or two campuses that would let a wheelchair person on campus if they could find their own housing, if they could have their own attendant care and whatnot. But we had just the opposite approach. We wanted them to come to campus and be like regular students.
Mm-hmm. So it's really striking how it seems that for so many people here, maybe for administrators, for these people's families, fear based on maybe lack of experience was really a big barrier.
It was unique. I could tell you 100 different cases where parents did different things to dissuade their youngster. Other parents worked hard to convince their youngster to stay. It was a two-directional problem at that time in history. I remember one young fellow coming to school, was very severely disabled, body was kind of disfigured. And while he was in my office, I heard the mother say to the father, "I don't know why we're doing this. He's going to die in the first year on campus anyway."
That's just remarkable. And did he know that his parents felt that?
Oh, he must have known that. And I had one boy that got so mad during our interview in the office, he was sitting in a chair like this with his wheelchair next to him, and he picked up the chair and threw it at my desk.
So you were the founder of the Division of Rehabilitation Education Services, right? And you did that from until you retired in 1985. So when was that established? The Division of Rehabilitation Education Services?
It was established in 1948, but it wasn't known as that at the time.
Okay.
My name changed, I think, 17 or 18 times. Many committees would attach a different name to us, thinking it would keep the program, a lid on the program, or maybe even dismiss the program. I know there's 1 2-year period, I think they changed our name 17 times unofficially.
Well, was it important to you ultimately to have it called that and to have both rehabilitation and education, those words in there in the name of it?
Well, if you stop and think, rehabilitation or special education is merely a more intense program of education focused on an individual rather than a group. Mm-hmm. So I combined the two because I had to pick something that would convey the intent of the program and that would be acceptable. And so rehabilitation, education, having the same tools, doing the same thing but in a different intensity was the reason.
Yeah. I mentioned at the outset that because of you and your being here, that the University of Illinois has really become a power in collegiate wheelchair athletics. And the thing, I think one of the things, well, maybe it wasn't the first thing that you did, but maybe the thing that really got attention was wheelchair basketball. And you started doing that actually when you were at Galesburg.
Yeah. In fact, we held the first national wheelchair basketball tournament at Galesburg.
So it was at Galesburg that I was a little confused about whether that was there or it was here. And that was 48 or 49?
No, 49, spring of 49.
1949. So what about basketball was attractive, you think?
I realized after I had these students on campus, even the veterans, that they needed much more than academics and counseling. They needed a way to give out their pent-up energies. They needed a way to gain satisfaction from their skills and abilities. And I needed something else too. I needed a way or a means to project them into the public eye so the public would come to understand these people have the same aspirations, the interests, talents, and skills that the rest of us have. Mm-hmm. They just do it differently.
Well, I'd like to have you talk a little bit more about some of your experiences with, say, administrators and faculty on the campus when, we got to the point where the administration said, all right, fine, you come here. What sort of, and they had to administration and perhaps some faculty had to realize there were serious physical barriers, accessibility issues that had to be worked with, and maybe some compromises had to be made. How did faculty and administration react to this?
They varied. There were a large number that were absolutely opposed to the whole idea. There was a large number that questioned it, but didn't overtly oppose it. And there were those who understood what we were trying to do and were helpful. I used to do several things along the way. For instance, I would make 600 professors mad at me at the beginning of almost every semester because in the beginning, I had to move classes from an inaccessible place to an accessible place because we only made 2 academic buildings accessible the first year, Lincoln Hall and the English, no, not the English building, Lincoln Hall and, oh, I'm losing, it's been too many years. But anyway, then I had to move 300 professors from the classes that rooms that I was going to use back to the ones I emptied out. Well, I had these professors mad at me. At the same time, there were those faculty that even if they didn't understand fully, they were willing to help and listen. And some of the deans, the budget was different in those days. You had until September 30, I think, to use the funds that you hadn't expended during the fiscal year. And at that time, I would make requests to different deans to do this at that building, do this at that building, and they would use some of those funds to help me. Mm-hmm. This went on for years. And when we did that and they intermingled with the faculty and students in those buildings, they came to understand, hey, this isn't such a bad idea. Yeah. Even if they didn't want to support it, they weren't going to oppose it. In fact, one parent wrote a letter to the DI some years later, and he said something to this effect: "It's wonderful what the university has done for those with disabilities. What's more important is what they've done for the general public in coming to understand those with disabilities."
Yeah. Nowadays, at least in part because of the ADA, we have ramps, elevators, we have bathroom stalls that are wider, we have curb cuts, we have things to facilitate people moving around. Back in 1948, 49, 50, those things didn't exist. And you actually had to go out and do some of these things yourself. How did you start to approach making the campus physically accessible?
Well, there was not just one way. The presence of a problem is the absence of an idea, and the first thing you do is explore the thinking of the person on the other side and then find a way around it. But we use scaffolding from a paint, or planks rather, from a paint scaffolding on Lincoln Hall to demonstrate that they could get in Lincoln Hall. And that was the first building we ramped. It was a clumsy looking ramp. It wouldn't be tolerated today. And we did that gradually on several buildings. It wasn't, as I say, it wasn't always opposition. It was lack of understanding and unwillingness to accept.
And maybe you can tell the story of how you managed to do this that you were involved in was to put wheelchair lifts, to have some buses, a couple of buses that were equipped with wheelchair lifts. And my understanding is at the time, there wasn't such a thing anywhere. There were no buses with lifts anywhere.
Now, our bus system goes back to 1952. The legislation is only 20 years old. And again, I can credit a good friend, Carmon Blitz of Chicago, who, when he put the first lifts in our buses, the hydraulic lift companies would not fool with it because they had lifts for cargo, but they didn't want human cargo. So they wouldn't touch it. So Carmon Blitz engineered my first lifts, put them in the first 2 old buses I had. We became very close, and he liked the idea. He was a forward-looking person. He had one of the largest bus fabrication factories in the world. And we became good friends, and he fabricated every lift after that for my buses, which probably was 25 or 30 at that time over the years. And never charged me after the first year. The first year I paid him for what it cost. But after that, he never charged me.
How did, because the accessibility, this wouldn't just be an issue for the campus, how did the people the public works folks, the civil engineering folks in Champaign and Urbana respond to the needs of disabled students?
Well, it's rather interesting you asked that question, because actually John Kearns, who was city engineer in Champaign, got behind me when making curb cuts before the university did. I would call John up and I'd say, John, we've had a change in traffic patterns and I need the curbs cut at such and such a street. 24 hours later, they'd be done. So people outside entered into it. I think that some of the times in the early years, the people outside understood what I was trying to do before some of the university faculty did.
Yeah.
But that's partly because they're also deeply ingrained in their own specialty.
Now we have, on the University of Illinois campus, a state-of-the-art housing facility for disabled students. And I think it's named after you, as a matter of fact.
Yes, it is.
Nugent Hall. Again, going back to the time we're talking about, so, 1949, 1950, where were students, the disabled students, where were they living?
Well, at Galesburg, they lived in the Army hospital units, which were all accessible. When they came here, they lived in tar paper shacks. And it was interesting because if you were within 10 feet of the space heater, you were too hot. If you were 11 foot away, you froze to death. And that also was my office and my clinic for years. We did ramp Lincoln Hall the first year, but even there we had a tussle. They estimated it would cost about, I'm going to have to guess at this, I think they said something about $220,000 to ramp the hall. No, I'm sorry, it was $10,000 to ramp Lincoln Hall on the outside without any changes on the inside yet. And that was prohibitive at that time. So I went to the father of my wheelchair girl, who's a civilian girl, was with us at Galesburg. I said, would you make out a $10,000 check to the University of Illinois and mark it for a ramp on Lincoln Hall? Yes, okay. When I presented the check, they were embarrassed to accept it. So they ramped the building for $250.
So it actually only cost $250.
Arguments were used like that arbitrarily. They would have a reason and they would embellish the reason why it shouldn't be done. And that was just a normal phenomena of change in history and a change in attitudes.
When you were getting started here and you were talking about the 50s and into the 60s, and you were involved in a lot of the struggles that we've been talking about having to do with inclusion and accessibility, did you think that particularly the students themselves and you, because you were with them, were involved in a kind of a civil rights struggle?
We didn't call it that in those days because those things weren't that popular in those days. But we all knew what we were doing. In fact, we had a fraternity, Delta Sigma Omicron, the first national fraternity for people with disabilities. It was a service fraternity. And we would meet and they would discuss, this is what we have to do to make it more available to people. We have to convince people. We had all sorts of programs going on at that time to perpetuate the program, even though most of the attitudes were adverse. So the kids themselves were a big part of it. And I did a lot of things in the program through the fraternity. Money that went to the fraternity was used for parts of the program. So it's hard to isolate these things because they all fall together in different patterns.
So back near the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned the fact that it's now, the Americans with Disability Act has been around now for 23 years, and it won't be all that long before it'll be a quarter century. And when it hit 20 years, a lot of people were talking about how significant it was, what a milestone that legislation was. What about that? I mean, where do you think we are now as a nation simply on issues of accessibility, inclusion, removing barriers?
Oh, I think we've made a great deal of headway, but I also have a thought that The AD is just over 20 years old. Our program is 65, 66 years old. I've appeared before Congress more than one time. And it's amazing that the difficulty in trying to get certain things through and the lack of understanding on the part of legislatures when they hear things and how they accept things. Time doesn't permit me to go into detail, but I had some very unique experiences with that. It's my opinion that a lot of times the politicians won't act until somebody else proves its worth.
Well, and when you think about all the people that have been through your program, and then all of the people whose attitudes have been shaped by your students, and then if you look at the kind of work that you've done that has to do with accessibility and how people have looked at that and applied that all over the world, you couldn't count the number of people whose lives you've influenced.
I had a job to do and I did it.
Well, I know that's what you said in this interview that I saw. Well, you know, we've been talking for a while, and I'm going to let you go here just in a moment, just as a way of finishing up, though. If I said something like, well, in this work that you've done now all these years, decades and decades, and can continue to do, would you say that there was some sort of set of principles that guided you?
Oh yes, very definitely. I would have to give a lecture to tell you all of it, but first of all, I feel that too many people, and particularly in the academic world, wait until they think they know the answers or the outcome of something they want to do rather than moving ahead. And so one of my philosophical tenets was you go as far as you can see, and when you get there, you'll be surprised how much you learned along the way and how much further you can see. And I think that's the way you approach problems like this. You do what you can do, you learn something in the process, and you go another step further.
Well, there, I think we'll have to leave it. Such great pleasure to talk with you. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And to you all for watching, thank you. And we hope that you will join us again next time for another edition of Illinois Pioneers.